In this video, we're going to be exploring the trend over the last century or so for churches moving together, what's often referred to as Christian unity, and see how this reverses the various splits that have been over the last 2,000 years in the church. Before we look at the coming back together, it's worth having a look at the separation, remind ourselves at what the starting point was for this move towards unity. The first one we're interested in is the Great Schism. There's a specific date of 1054 put on this, but the East and the West had divided, geopolitically they were separated, and that meant that different traditions, different practices, different doctrines have grown up in those two traditions over the centuries. And then there was this final formal separation, 1054. The Eastern tradition, essentially, I'm going to leave just as the Eastern tradition and focus then on the West. The next one we're therefore interested in is this in the Western tradition of beginning of the 16th century. So we've moved on about 500 years, and we're now looking at the Reformation, normally dated from Luther's 95 Theses, 1517. What happened here then is you had the Protestants. Now the Protestants, notice that's plural, because that then fragmented, that strand fragmented into lots of different denominations. Roman Catholics, up until the Reformation, had managed to more or less keep themselves within the same church, the umbrella of the Roman Catholic Church, and they worked out all their tensions but stayed within it. But once the Reformation happened, the Roman Catholic Church stayed as it was, holding together any tensions, but the Protestants then just fragmented into numerous different denominations. They are known as Protestants because they protest, and what they then did from Luther onwards was you would have a church, there was a disagreement within the church, and the church then split and somebody took off a group of people to have their own doctrines, and a new denomination, new church was formed. And then a few decades down the line, there was a disagreement in that church, and then somebody left and took a group of followers with them, and so it went on. And so you end up then with a significant fragmentation within Protestantism. We're now going to pick this up as the trend starts to reverse. I'm going to have a look at the World Missionary Conference of 1910, and then the World Council of Churches, which was formed in 1948. Those actually should be much closer to each other, having two world wars in between rather lengthened the process. I want to have a look at just one of those orange Protestant strands from the previous diagram, the one of Methodism, and have a look at what happened within that particular denomination. Now you can see that you get to the 1791 death of John Wesley. That's when the Methodists parted company formally with the Church of England, became their own denomination. And then the Methodists fragmented into numerous different strands, different types of Methodist. And what we're interested in is this point as the church moves into the 20th century, then what you see there is a reuniting of all those separate strands. Some of it was very pragmatic, and some of it was more theological and doctrinal. So that means then that by the time you get to the early 30s, there was then a formal reuniting within Methodism. And just some personal history here. I spent my youth within the Methodist Church, and looking at some of the simple social factors in the area of Manchester I lived, there were 3 Methodist churches, all within about a mile of each other, all with Victorian buildings which were in need of quite serious renovation. By that stage they were somewhere in the sort of 50 to 75 years old, and the congregations were reasonably strong, but not quite as strong as they had been. And so what happened at mid-60s, these 3 churches decided it would be sensible to unite and to form one Methodist church. What it was a hangover from previous different strands within Methodism. And so that was driven by the desire to work together, but it was also, there was the very simple financial pressure that it meant that as a result of that, we ended up then in a single building with just one building to maintain, and it was before we moved into it, it was thoroughly modernized, and so therefore it was a completely appropriate church for the latter part of the 20th century. That church is still functioning as the Methodist church for that area. The Eduqas RS A-level Christianity syllabus picks up on 3 very important strands of this move towards unity. The first of these we're going to look at is the what's often dated as the start of the ecumenical movement, the World Missionary Conference 1910, and then the development of that into the World Council of Churches, which is normally dated 1948, but when we look at this, you'll see that obviously there were 2 world wars, the Depression, and lots of other things in the middle which extended that timetable. Another strand we're going to look at is religious experience, and particularly what's generally known as the charismatic movement. So we trace this from its beginnings, the early parts of the 20th century in the Pentecostal movement, and then see how that developed into the post-1960s charismatic movement. The final strand we're going to look at is the response to poverty and injustice, and look at that through a study of liberation theology, particularly in the South American context. And these 3 themes pick up very well the reasons underlying that move from the fragmentation of previous centuries to a more united understanding within Christianity and a desire to do things together. Now, these 3 are all interrelated, and alongside that there's also that very pragmatic, financially driven one that I mentioned in terms of my own experience of the rejoining within the Methodist Church. But we're going to focus on these 3 within the syllabus. It's difficult to know where to start, so I'll start really with D then, and we can call this top down. So this is the institutional church. This is the leaders within churches getting together in formal conferences like the 1910 Missionary Conference, and making formal decisions that we will meet to explore unity. And they then pass motions, they set up initiatives within their own particular denomination to say that we will work for greater unity. Now, that fairly obviously creates a climate where unity is on the agenda. The other 2 themes we could look at as bottom up. So this is individual Christians in their own personal Christian lives. And 2 strands here. One is they're having personal religious experiences, maybe charismatic experiences, or maybe it might be the same people, but we're going to separate these out, or maybe they're people who are identifying a particular social need. And what they can then often find is that they are united through each of those far more with other people. So if you've had a charismatic experience, you then find that actually you're more linked to and feel more affinity with those others who've had those charismatic experiences, who might belong to different denominations, than people who haven't within your own denomination. So potentially you would quite easily find that people within the Church of England, the Methodist Church, the Baptist Church, potentially the Roman Catholic Church, who've had these charismatic renewal experiences, all feel more comfortable together and worshipping together than they would within their own traditions, meeting with people who have not had those charismatic experiences. And similarly, the social needs, one, the people as individual Christians identify a need. A standard one would be setting up food banks, work with the homeless. And what they find is that they are working together with people from a wide range of churches, and they're united. Their denominational differences just cease to matter, because what they're concerned about is just getting on with the job of, say, setting up a food bank. Who cares whether you're a Roman Catholic, an Anglican, a Methodist, an independent evangelical? It really doesn't matter what you're doing in church on a Sunday. What matters is finding the food, getting the facilities to do it, and just get on with that very practical task. Now, of course, this then continues to feed. So, of course, those people who are having those individual religious experiences, who are having those insights into the need for particular social projects, working with others, well, those are people who also, some of them, are in leadership positions within the institutional church. And so, therefore, when they are functioning at institutional church level, they are looking at ways of working together. So when they meet together in leadership, they then find that they can very comfortably work with others in leadership in other denominations, because they've been working with them in these individual projects. And so the whole thing is this virtuous cycle where this combination of top down and bottom up just continues to feed in to reducing the tensions between those denominations, and works towards reuniting all those fragmented strands within the Christian church.